I never imagined I'd find myself in this situation. I always thought I was a good judge of character, that I could tell the difference between genuine affection and calculated interest. But I was wrong. I should have seen the signs earlier. Should have caught the subtle ways she manipulated conversations, how she navigated her way into my life with precision. But when you're in love, you ignore the warning bells, convincing yourself that what you feel is real, that the person you're with sees you for who you are, not what you have. My father built one of the most successful private security firms in the country. It wasn't handed to me. I earned my place. Growing up, I spent my summers learning the business from the ground up, running drills, working in logistics, and understanding every aspect of the industry. My father was my mentor, my guiding force. When he passed, it wasn't just grief that weighed me down. It was responsibility. That's when things with Isabel started shifting. She had always been magnetic, effortlessly charming. The kind of woman who made you feel like you were the only person in the room. We met at an industry gala, a charity event where she worked in PR. She was sharp, stylish, with a confidence that made people gravitate toward her. I was smitten from the start. At first, things were perfect. She supported me, or so I thought. She knew how much my work meant to me, how much I respected the company my father built. She seemed invested in my success. But looking back, I realized she was never interested in me, just the life I could provide. When my father passed, I expected Isabel to be my anchor. Instead, she started asking questions. Not about how I was coping, not about my mother or my brother Daniel, who had stepped in to help me run the company. No, she wanted details about the business. "How much of the company is yours?" she asked one evening, barely 2 weeks after the funeral. The question caught me off guard. I was exhausted, overwhelmed, still reeling from the loss of my father. I hesitated before answering. "Daniel and I share the responsibility," I told her, keeping my tone neutral. She pressed further. "But you're the majority shareholder, right? You're the one making the decisions?" I remember feeling uneasy, but I dismissed it. I told myself she was just trying to understand my world, to be part of it. But the questions didn't stop. She started sitting in on meetings, making comments about company strategy as if she belonged there. She'd mention expansions, acquisitions, things she had no business knowing about. And then there was Daniel. She started bringing him up more and more. "You and Daniel are so different," she mused one night as we had dinner. "He's more aggressive in business, isn't he?" I nodded, not thinking much of it. "He's always been the risk-taker." She smiled, sipping her wine. "That must be hard for you. I mean, you're the responsible one, the one who actually keeps things together." The words were subtle, but they lingered in my mind. Was she trying to drive a wedge between us? I ignored the feeling, until one night, when she asked something that made my stomach turn. "If you weren't in charge of the company, what would you do?" I looked up from my laptop, startled. "What do you mean?" She shrugged, playing it off. "Just wondering, if something happened, if Daniel took over, what would that mean for us?" For us. That's when it clicked. She didn't love me. She loved the idea of being with the future head of my father's empire. And if I wasn't that person, she was already thinking of a way out. I felt sick. So I did what my father would have done. I decided to test her. I spent the next few days planting seeds, giving Isabel just enough doubt to see how she would react. I knew if I played it right, she'd expose herself. It started subtly. I made offhand comments about company restructuring, about how Daniel was starting to take a more active role. At first, she didn't say much, but then I took it a step further. One evening, after dinner, I sighed heavily, rubbing my temples as if burdened by a heavy decision. "I've been thinking a lot about my future in the company," I said carefully. "Daniel's really stepping up. There's a chance I might step back a little." I expected hesitation, maybe some words of reassurance. Instead, she sat up straight, her interest piqued. "Step back? What do you mean?" I shrugged, keeping my expression neutral. "I don't know. I mean, I'll always be involved, but maybe not in the same way. I don't want to spend my whole life buried in boardrooms and security contracts." She stared at me, lips parted slightly. "But you love the company. You always said it was your father's legacy." I nodded. "It is. But maybe there's more to life than just business." For a second, She didn't say anything. Then, she smiled, too quickly. Of course, babe. Whatever makes you happy. But there was something off about her tone, something forced. She was calculating. That's when I knew she'd take the bait. A few days later, my suspicions were confirmed. I caught her texting Daniel. At first, I brushed it off. Siblings and partners texting wasn't strange. But when I glanced at her screen and saw the message, my stomach twisted. I admire how decisive you are. You're such a natural leader. I felt a cold rush of disbelief. I didn't say anything right away, but I watched. She started dropping Daniel's name more often, commenting on his business strategies, making excuses to be around him. And then the twist I hadn't expected happened. It wasn't just my company Isabel was after. I found out she was already involved with someone else. It happened by accident. One evening, Daniel and I were discussing an upcoming security contract when he hesitated. Hey man, I wasn't sure if I should tell you this, but I saw something weird. I frowned. What do you mean? He exhaled slowly. Last week, I was at the Conrad for a meeting. I saw Isabel there, with someone else. My pulse kicked up. Who? A guy. Older. They were in the lounge, talking close. It didn't look like a business meeting. I felt a sinking feeling in my gut. Are you sure? Daniel hesitated, then pulled out his phone. I wasn't going to say anything, but I snapped a picture just in case. I took the phone, and my blood ran cold. There she was, sitting in a dimly lit booth, leaning in toward a man in a tailored suit, smiling. Her hand was resting lightly on his wrist. What the hell? My voice was barely above a whisper. Daniel's expression was grim. I don't know who he is, but I figured you should see it. My mind reeled. She wasn't just setting her sights on Daniel. She had a backup plan, another target. She was playing multiple angles, making sure that no matter what happened, she'd land on her feet. Rage simmered beneath my skin, but I forced myself to stay calm. If she thought she could play me, she was wrong. I wasn't just going to expose her. I was going to make sure she had nowhere left to run. The betrayal stung, but I forced myself to stay composed. I had enough proof to end things with Isabel right then and there, but I wasn't after a simple breakup. I needed to make sure she was exposed. To Daniel, to my family, to whoever else she had wrapped around her finger. So, I played along. Over the next few days, I acted completely normal. I kissed her goodbye in the morning, held her hand in public, even entertained her endless questions about the company. But inside, I was watching, waiting. I needed to see how deep her schemes ran. Then, the perfect opportunity fell into my lap. Daniel had scheduled a private dinner with a potential investor, a high-profile tech executive who was interested in hiring our firm for high-security consultations. The meeting was going to be small, just Daniel, me, and the investor. But when Isabel got wind of it, she immediately latched on. That's huge, she said, eyes lighting up. You should let me come. I raised a brow. Why would you come to a business meeting? She pouted. Come on. I know how to schmooze, and it's good for them to see that you have a strong, supportive partner. It was laughable how transparent she was. This wasn't about supporting me. It was about getting into the right rooms, making connections for herself. But I pretended to consider it before sighing, like she had worn me down. Fine, but just dinner. No talking business. She beamed, completely unaware she had just walked into a trap. The night of the dinner, she dressed to impress. Elegant, confident, the perfect image of a powerful businessman's fiancée. But the real show started when we arrived at the restaurant. The investor, David Langston, was a sharp man in his 50s, no nonsense, direct. We exchanged pleasantries, and Isabel was on her best behavior. Charming, poised. But halfway through the meal, I saw exactly what I was waiting for. She leaned forward, directing the conversation toward Daniel. You must be so overwhelmed, taking on so much responsibility so quickly, she mused. I admire how effortlessly you handle it. Daniel, playing his part, gave a casual shrug. It's all about having the right people around you. Her smile deepened. Exactly. That's what makes a great leader, knowing who to trust, who to rely on. She was laying the foundation, trying to plant the idea in Daniel's head that she could be an asset to him, that if he was stepping up, she could be the one supporting him instead. It was sickening, but I let her talk. I let her pour on the charm, the sweet smiles, the light touches on Daniel's wrist. And the whole time, I watched as David Langston, the very investor she was trying to impress, started putting the pieces together. At one point, he leaned back, eyes narrowing slightly as he observed her interaction with Daniel. He wasn't a fool. He had seen people like her before. Opportunists, social climbers. By the time dessert arrived, he had lost interest in her completely. But Isabel didn't notice. She was too busy trying to secure her next position. That's when I made my move. I pulled out my phone, casually scrolling, then sighed heavily. Damn. Isabel glanced over. What is it? I tilted my screen just enough for her to see a picture, the one Daniel had taken. The one of her in the lounge with the older man. The blood drained from her face. I didn't say anything, just gave her a small, knowing smirk before turning my attention back to David and Daniel. Isabel barely spoke for the rest of the dinner. She knew. She knew the game was up. But she had no idea just how far I was willing to take this. The drive home was silent. Isabel sat stiffly in the passenger seat, her hands clenched in her lap. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head, trying to figure out if she should confront me or play dumb. I let the tension stretch between us, the weight of the unspoken truth suffocating the air in the car. She had seen the picture. She knew I knew, but she didn't know how much I knew. When we finally pulled into the driveway, she exhaled sharply. What was that about? I turned off the ignition, resting my hands on the wheel. What about? She hesitated. That picture. On your phone. I turned to her, my expression unreadable. I could ask you the same thing, Isabel. Her mouth opened and closed. I don't know what you think you saw, but... I laughed. I actually laughed. Oh, come on. Don't insult me. She stiffened. It's not what it looks like. It's never what it looks like, is it? I mused. So why don't you tell me? Who is he? She bit her lip, searching for a lie. He's just an old friend. We ran into each other, that's all. I nodded, pretending to consider her words. An old friend. Right. And you just happened to be leaning in, holding his wrist, looking at him like he was your next meal ticket? Her face paled. Max. Save it. I cut her off. I already know what's going on. I know about the messages to Daniel. I know about the investor meeting stunt. And I know you're not just looking at one backup plan. You've got multiple. She swallowed hard. That's not true. I scoffed. Really? So if I checked your phone right now, I wouldn't find any texts, any plans, any conversations where you were trying to secure yourself a place in someone else's future. She flinched. That was all the confirmation I needed. But I wasn't done yet. I pulled out my own phone and scrolled through my files. See, I'm not like you, Isabel. I don't make reckless moves without covering my bases first. I turned the screen toward her, and her breath hitched. A folder labeled, Isabel, Proof. Screenshots. Photos. Recordings. Her jaw tightened. You were spying on me? I let out a bitter laugh. You call it spying. I call it self-preservation. She started shaking her head, her voice rising. This is insane, Max. I'm your fiancé. How could you? You were never my fiancé, I said coldly. You were an opportunist looking for an investment. And now that the deal isn't working out in your favor, you're scrambling. Her eyes filled with panic. No, it's not like that. I love you. I tilted my head. Really? Then tell me, if I wasn't running the company, if I wasn't my father's son, would you have even looked at me twice? She opened her mouth, but no words came out. There it was. The truth. And she knew it too. The fight drained out of her shoulders as she slumped back into her seat, staring at me with something between anger and desperation. What are you going to do? I exhaled slowly. Oh, Isabel. It's not about what I'm going to do. I pushed open the car door and stepped out, walking around to the passenger side. She flinched as I pulled the door open. It's about what you're going to do, I said, my voice calm but firm. You're going to pack your things. You're going to leave. And you're not going to contact me again. Her lower lip trembled. You can't just throw me away. I leaned in slightly, my eyes locked onto hers. You threw yourself away the moment you decided I was just a stepping stone. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, with a trembling breath, she turned away and climbed out of the car. I didn't watch her go. I didn't need to. The game was over. But I still had one last move to play. I should have felt relief. Victory. Even. I had caught Isabel in the act, exposed her for who she really was, and made it clear that she was out of my life. But something still didn't sit right. It wasn't just about her betrayal anymore. It was about who she had been meeting in secret. Because while I had proof of her messages to Daniel, the encounter with the older man at the Conrad still haunted me. It felt different, like a piece of the puzzle that didn't quite fit. So, I did what any man in my position would do. I dug deeper. With Daniel's help, I got the security footage from the Conrad. It wasn't difficult. Our company had handled some of their high-profile security installations, and a favor here and there got me access to what I needed. What I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't just some wealthy investor or another potential backup plan. It was someone I recognized. Michael Calloway, a name I hadn't heard in years, but one I could never forget. Michael had been one of my father's biggest competitors, a ruthless businessman who had always wanted to sink his teeth into our company. He had tried buying us out once before, years ago, but my father had refused. He had too much integrity to sell to a man like that. But Michael had always played dirty. He didn't take rejection well. And now, years later, here he was, sitting in a private booth with Isabel, speaking in hushed voices. My heart pounded as I watched the footage again. This wasn't just about her wanting to secure a future for herself. She had been working with him. I didn't know how long it had been going on, but I knew one thing. She hadn't just been planning to leave me. She had been feeding him information. That was her real endgame. It all made sense now. The pointed questions about company structure. The sudden interest in expansion plans. She hadn't just been looking for a better deal. She had been trying to sell me out. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to breathe. This wasn't just personal anymore. This was war. I picked up my phone and called Daniel. We need to talk. Now. 20 minutes later, Daniel and I were in my office, going over the footage again. He leaned back, rubbing a hand over his face. Jesus. She wasn't just a gold digger. She was a damn mole. I exhaled sharply, nodding. It looks that way. Daniel shook his head in disbelief. She played us both. Acted like she was after me just in case things didn't work out with you. But the whole time, she was getting close to Michael. He let out a bitter laugh. You think she actually loved either of us? I didn't answer. I already knew the truth. Love had never been part of Isabel's equation. I'm not letting this slide, I muttered. Michael has wandered away into our company for years. Isabel was his way in. I turned to Daniel, my jaw tight. He doesn't get to win this. Daniel smirked. I was hoping you'd say that. The next morning, I made my move. I sent Isabel a simple text. We need to talk. In person. One last time. She hesitated at first, probably thinking it was a trick. But eventually, she agreed. We set the meeting at a quiet, upscale bar downtown. Somewhere public enough that she wouldn't cause a scene. She arrived dressed to kill. Perfectly put together. As if she still believed she could talk her way out of this. She slid into the booth across from me, offering a careful smile. Max. I studied her, taking in every little detail. The flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. The way she crossed her legs just a little too tightly. She was nervous. Good. I wanted to give you one last chance to be honest with me, I said, keeping my voice even. Her expression remained smooth. Honest about what? I pulled my phone from my pocket and placed it on the table. With one tap, the security footage from the Conrad played on the screen. Her face drained of color. I watched as her mask slipped, just for a second. Then, just as quickly, she forced a laugh. Oh, come on. You're really spying on me now? I tilted my head. Tell me, Isabel, what exactly were you and Michael Calloway discussing? Her fingers twitched against the table. It was just a meeting. Bullshit. My voice came out colder than I intended. You were feeding him information about my company. About my family. She leaned in, her eyes flashing with something dangerous. And what if I was? I felt the muscles in my jaw tighten. Then you made the biggest mistake of your life. She scoffed. Oh, please. Don't act like you're some innocent victim. Your father built that company playing just as dirty as everyone else. You think I'm the first person who saw an opportunity and took it? She shook her head, her voice dripping with disdain. You're naive, Max. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. No, I was naive. I tapped the phone screen again, and this time, another file popped up, a legal document. This is a cease and desist order. As of tomorrow morning, my lawyers will be sending this to Calloway's office. You're done, Isabel. You won't be getting a cent from me, and you sure as hell won't be selling off pieces of my company. Her breath hitched. You wouldn't. I smirked. Watch me. For the first time since I'd met her, Isabel looked truly scared. I stood, sliding a crisp $100 bill onto the table. Consider this my last investment in you. Then I walked away, leaving her alone in the dimly lit bar, watching as everything she had schemed for crumbled around her. The war was over, and I had won that. I walked out of that bar without looking back. Isabel was finished, and she knew it. But I wasn't done yet. I had one last move to make, one that would ensure Michael Calloway and anyone else like him never got another shot at my company, my family, or me. By the time I got back to my office, my legal team was already in motion. We weren't just serving Calloway with a cease and desist. We were going after everything, freezing any potential deals that might have benefited from the stolen information, cutting off any contacts he had within our company, and ensuring that he knew, in no uncertain terms, that this war was over before it even began. And Isabel? She was about to find out just how ruthless I could be when someone tried to play me. The next morning, a news article dropped. Security mogul's fiancé caught in corporate espionage scandal. It was everywhere. While I hadn't leaked the information myself, someone had. Maybe one of our investors. Maybe someone from Calloway's camp looking to cover their own ass. Either way, the damage was done. Isabel's name was now tied to corporate betrayal. No one in my industry would touch her. By noon, I got a call from a mutual acquaintance. Isabel's been trying to do damage control. She's claiming the whole thing is a misunderstanding. I smirked. Let her try. By evening, her name was trending for all the wrong reasons. She had spent years crafting this perfect image of herself. Charming, poised, someone who belonged in high-powered social circles. Now, she was radioactive. Calloway, predictably, threw her under the bus. He denied everything, claimed she had acted on her own, said he had no knowledge of her involvement in company affairs. Of course, I knew better. But it didn't matter. Because now, Isabel had no safety net. That night, as I was pouring myself a drink, my phone buzzed. Isabel, Max, please. Can we talk? I let the message sit there, unread. A minute later, another one popped up. Isabel, you don't understand. I had no choice. I chuckled under my breath. No choice? She had every choice in the world, and she had chosen to betray me. One last message came through. Isabel, you'll regret this. I stared at the words for a moment, then blocked her number. There was nothing left to say. A week later, I ran into Daniel at one of our security training facilities. He leaned against the railing, watching the recruits run their drills. So, he said, smirking, how's life without your scheming fiancé? I exhaled slowly, rolling my shoulders. Peaceful. He chuckled. Hell of a way to end things. Yeah, I admitted. But necessary. Daniel gave me a knowing look. You're going to be more careful next time, right? I laughed dryly. I'd like to think I learned my lesson. He nodded, then clapped a hand on my shoulder. Good. Because the next time you date someone that crazy, I'm punching you in the face. I grinned. Fair enough. We stood there for a while, watching the recruits go through their exercises. The weight of the last few weeks was still there, lingering in the back of my mind. But for the first time in a long time, I felt free. No more manipulation. No more deception. Just me, my family, and the empire my father built. And no one, not Isabel, not Calloway, not anyone, would ever take that from me. It took a while for the dust to settle. Isabel had disappeared from my world, but the echoes of her betrayal lingered. For weeks, I heard whispers about her trying to claw her way back into high society, attempting to salvage her reputation. But no one was buying it. Her name was tainted, her schemes too public. She tried getting sympathy, spinning stories about how I had set her up or ruined her life. But people weren't stupid. The evidence spoke for itself, and those who might have sided with her before, they weren't willing to risk their own standing by associating with her now. As for Calloway, he went quiet. He knew he had lost this battle before it even began. I'd made sure he had no openings left to exploit. In the end, they both faded into irrelevance, and I moved on. A few months later, I was at a company event, one of those formal networking galas filled with investors, executives, and old friends of my father's. It was my first public appearance since the whole fiasco with Isabel, and people were watching. Some approached me cautiously, asking careful questions, trying to gauge if I was still wounded from the fallout. But I wasn't. If anything, I was stronger than before. At one point, Daniel nudged me. "So, any new potential fiancés in the crowd?" I smirked, shaking my head. "Not looking for one." He laughed. "Good. You deserve someone who actually gives a damn about you, not your last name." He wasn't wrong. I had spent so long believing in an illusion, mistaking Isabel's admiration for genuine love. But now, I understood something my father had once told me. Power attracts people, but not always the right ones. And I wasn't going to make the same mistake again. As the night went on, I found myself stepping away from the crowd, taking a breath of fresh air on the balcony. That's when I heard a voice behind me. "Figured you'd need a break from the circus." I turned and found myself looking at someone I hadn't expected. Sienna. She was an old friend. Someone I had known for years but had never really looked at in that way. She had never chased the spotlight, never cared about the power plays of my world. She just was. And in that moment, after everything I had been through, that felt like something rare. I smirked, raising an eyebrow. "And what makes you think I need a break?" She grinned. "Because I know you. And I know you'd rather be anywhere but stuck in there with a bunch of people pretending they actually care." I exhaled, leaning against the railing. "You're not wrong." She studied me for a second, then said, "I heard about everything with Isabel." I tensed slightly, but Sienna just shook her head. "Don't worry, I'm not here to pity you. I just think it's about time you surrounded yourself with people who actually want you, not what you come with." Something about the way she said it settled deep inside me. I nodded. "Yeah, I think so too." She smiled. "Well, good. Because I'm starving, and I need an excuse to leave early. So, what do you say? Burgers instead of champagne?" I chuckled, feeling lighter than I had in months. "You know what? That sounds perfect." As we walked away from the gala, I realized something. The past no longer weighed me down. I had come out of this stronger, smarter, and maybe, just maybe, ready for something real.